The Montgomery estate sat like a jewel on the edge of Lake St. Claire, its glass walls reflecting a late autumn sky the color of cold steel. From the driveway, the place looked serene like something out of an architectural magazine. But the moment Amara Hayes stepped out of the black town car, she heard it. Shouting, thuds, the unmistakable crash of something expensive meeting its end. She tightened her grip on her leather satchel and followed the noise around to the back terrace. That's when her breath caught. On the second-floor balcony, a boy no older than 6 was dragging a bronze sculpture toward the railing. The thing must have weighed nearly half his size, but he was determined, jaw set, like a tiny general about to launch a siege. 2 identical boys stood behind him, egging him on their voices, carrying through the crisp air. "Do it, Lucas. Throw it into the lake." Lucas, Amara's voice cut through before she even realized she'd spoken. All 3 heads turned toward her, 3 faces so alike, it was as if grief had been cloned. They had the same messy dark hair, the same pale blue eyes, and the same mix of defiance and hurt. "Who are you?" the boy at the railing demanded. "I'm the woman who's going to stop you from breaking your neck," she said, walking toward the French doors with calm, measured steps. Lucas hesitated just long enough for Amara to cross the threshold and slip her hands around the cold metal sculpture. It took more strength than she cared to admit to steady it against the railing. "You could have crushed someone down there," she said quietly. The words weren't angry, just matter of fact. Lucas pulled back, arms crossed. "We don't care. We don't want you here. We don't want anyone here." From the doorway, another voice, deeper and laced with exasperation. "Lucas Montgomery, put that down right now, Ethan." Montgomery strode in, a phone still pressed to his ear, his suit jacket open, his tie slightly askew. He ended the call mid-sentence, sliding the phone into his pocket as his gaze shifted between Amara and the boys. "Who are you?" he asked, not unkindly, but with the tone of a man already past his limit for the day. "Amara Hayes. We spoke yesterday." His eyes narrowed in faint recognition. "You weren't supposed to start until tomorrow." "Then it's a good thing I came early," she said, glancing at Lucas, who still stood like a soldier guarding his post. "Because I think someone's about to declare war on your balcony furniture." One of the twins, Eli, though she didn't know his name yet, snickered. Caleb, the quieter one, simply stared at her like she was an alien. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Go to your rooms, all of you." "We're not prisoners," Lucas shot back. "Then stop acting like you want to burn the place down." Ethan replied, his voice sharp enough to still the air. The boys stormed past Amara in a flurry of small, furious footsteps, muttering under their breath. When the sound of them faded up the stairs, Ethan exhaled long and tired. "I'm sorry you had to walk into that," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm not," Amara replied. "It tells me exactly what I'm here for." Ethan studied her as if weighing whether that was confidence or naivete. Most people last an hour with them. A day, if they're lucky. Amara adjusted the strap of her satchel and gave a small, unshaken smile. "Then I guess we'll find out if I'm most people." Neither of them noticed the glint of a camera lens from the far side of the lake or the faint click of a shutter. Somewhere, a story was already being written about the Montgomery boys, one that could ruin them before she even had the chance to help. 6 months earlier, the Montgomery estate hadn't been a war zone. It had been a home. Ethan Montgomery could still see it, and if he closed his eyes, Isabel's laugh spilling through the kitchen as she whisked batter for Sunday pancakes, 3 small boys chasing each other around the island, while sunlight danced across the lake. It was noisy, chaotic, alive. And then, in a single phone call, all of it was gone. She'd been on her way into town to pick up a birthday surprise for him, a vintage leather watch he'd once admired in a store window. A drunk driver ran a red light. 2 hours later, Ethan was standing in a hospital hallway, staring at a doctor's lips, moving but unable to hear the words. The funeral was a blur. The weeks after were worse. He moved through them like a ghost, waking up to a house that felt too big, too cold and too quiet, until the noise came back, but it wasn't the kind anyone wanted. Lucas became the commander, fierce and unyielding, guarding his brothers from anyone he decided was a threat. Caleb retreated into silence, speaking only when he absolutely had to. Eli cried at night sometimes so hard that Ethan had to hold him until his small body went limp with exhaustion. By the time spring came, the boys had burned through 9 nannies. By summer, they'd reached 12. Some quit in tears after a single afternoon. Others left angry, muttering about ungrateful little monsters. It didn't help that the Montgomery name was carved into half the skyline of downtown Chicago. Every departure was whispered about in the kind of circles where gossip had sharp teeth. "Those boys are out of control," people said at charity dinners. "Ethan's too busy making money to raise them," they murmured at country club brunches. And maybe they weren't wrong. Ethan had buried himself in work, telling himself that the company needed him, that the next deal might distract him from the empty space in his bed and the ache in his chest. But every late night at the office meant another day the boys looked at him like a stranger. By the time they were down to their 13th nanny, even his assistant Mark Reynolds had stopped pretending to be optimistic. Mark stepped into Ethan's corner office one Tuesday morning, a tablet in hand. "I've got the bad news and the worst news," he said flatly. Ethan didn't look up from his laptop. "Bad news first. The bad news is the school called again. Yesterday, your sons locked their PE teacher in the equipment shed and climbed onto the roof of the gym. They refused to come down for 2 hours." Ethan closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. And the worst news, Mark set the tablet on the desk. The resignation email already open. "The worst news is that Ms. Hanley, the nanny you hired last week, left before breakfast this morning. She says, and I quote, 'I'd rather clean toilets in a bus station than spend another day in that house.'" Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling like it might hold an answer. How many does that make now? 13. 13 in 6 months. The words tasted like failure. Mark hesitated before speaking again. "I can put out a new listing, but..." "Word's out, Ethan. Nobody wants this job. At least not anyone worth hiring." For a long moment, Ethan didn't reply. His office windows stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a perfect view of the city he'd conquered, the one place he knew how to win. But this was a fight he didn't know how to win. "Post the ad," he said finally. "Offer double the standard salary. Somebody out there's got to be desperate enough to take the job." What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have guessed, was that the person who'd answer would be a woman with no fancy degrees, no prestigious references, nothing to lose. Except the walls she'd built around her own heart. Amara Hayes had never liked goodbyes. They were too neat for how life actually broke. Her studio apartment above the laundromat smelled faintly of detergent and rain. A single vine plant crawled along the window like it was trying to escape with her savings, which had dwindled to a number that made her stomach knot. She'd stretched every bill she could, walked instead of taking the bus, said no to dinners out, learned the art of making 3 meals from 1 rotisserie chicken. The job boards were a graveyard. 2 years minimum ECE credential. Masters preferred. References from private families only. She had none of those things. What she did have was a history she rarely told. Her mother's lullaby stopped when Amara was 7, snuffed out by a fire the neighbors said was no one's fault, which never felt true. Foster homes taught her how to travel light. 2 trash bags, 1 notebook, 1 photograph that curled at the edges from being held too tight. She learned the difference between be quiet and be safe, and the difference between adults who meant well and adults who meant control. Somewhere along the way, she figured out that children in pain don't act like victims. They act like hurricanes. By 25, she was the person friends called when a niece wouldn't sleep or a cousin started punching walls. She didn't have certifications. She had patterns. She listened. She sat on floors. She didn't flinch. Her last family, a tech couple in River North, liked her instincts until instinct made her step between their son and a father's temper on a Tuesday night. It didn't get violent. It didn't have to. The air told her enough. She came back Wednesday to find a check on the counter and her name removed from the door code. The agency wrote misalignment of expectations. She wrote "I'd do it again" in her journal and moved out within the week. On a wet Thursday, she folded towels in the downstairs laundromat for the discount and caught a headline on the small wall-mounted TV, "Montgomery Triplets. Run off 12th nanny. A photo appeared, 3 boys' mirror images, eyes that would have been bright if they weren't so hard. The crawl at the bottom said billionaire developer Ethan Montgomery declines to comment. Amara watched long enough to recognize the posture kids who'd built armor and decided to live in it. She returned to her apartment with warm towels pressed to her chest. Like a shield sat at the chipped desk and opened the ad Mark Reynolds had posted that morning. Nanny for 3 energetic boys. Competitive salary. Discretion required. Must handle challenging environments. She laughed one abrupt breath. Rich people for we're drowning. Her cursor blinked on a blank document. She didn't write a resume. She wrote a letter. Mr. Montgomery, I don't have a master's in early childhood education. I don't have a glossy reference from a family you play golf with. I have 10 years of sitting on floors with kids who punch first and cry later. I know that destruction is pain with nowhere to go. I know that grief can look like disrespect, and fear can sound like defiance. I don't promise to fix your sons. I don't think they're broken. I can promise to be the adult who does not leave when it gets loud. If you need that, I can start tomorrow at 7 a.m. I'll bring coffee. Amara Hayes. She attached a short list of references that would actually answer a school counselor, a CPS caseworker, who'd seen her sit through a midnight intake, a grandmother from Pilsen, whose grandson used to bite. She added 1 page of bullet points titled, What I Do on Day 1 Sit, where a child can choose distance. Offer 1 simple choice that cannot hurt anyone. Name the feeling before the behavior. Build a ritual before a rule. Feed them. Hungry brains don't learn. Rain stitched silver lines across Lake Street. On the opposite sidewalk, a little boy in a puffer coat refused to move, rooted to the spot, while his mother juggled a bag of groceries and a baby on her hip. The boy's fists were clenched, jaw set, eyes wide, the way eyes get right before a storm. Amara grabbed her umbrella and jogged down the stairs. Hey, she said to the mom, keeping her voice easy, her distance respectful. Mind if I try something? The mom looked exhausted enough to trust a stranger. If you can get him to the corner, I'll name my next kid after you. Amara crouched, umbrella tilting to make a small tent of quiet. Big day, she asked the boy. He didn't answer, but his breathing shifted. She held out her hand, palm up, not touching. Sometimes my feet feel like they're glued, she said. When that happens, I ask them to do the smallest job in the world. Could your left foot take 1 tiny step? Only left. Right can stay glued. The boy blinked, glanced at his shoe, and moved it an inch. Victory. She didn't cheer. She nodded like this was the most ordinary magic. Left did its job. Right's jealous now, she murmured. By the corner, the mom was laughing through what might have been tears. Thank you, she said. What do you do? Mostly listen, Amara said, and went back upstairs. At 1:12 a.m., she sent the email. At 1:13, she regretted it. At 1:14, she made peace with the fact that if he didn't answer, she'd still pay rent somehow. She slept hard and dreamless for the first time in weeks. Across the lake, in a house where even silence felt expensive, Ethan Montgomery stared at his screen long after midnight, scrolling past polished resumes that promised miracles in serif fonts. He almost skipped the plain subject line about your sons until the first sentence anchored him in his chair. He read it once, then again. Then a third time slower. When he finally looked up, the window reflected a man he almost recognized, tired, yes, but with something sharp awake in his eyes. He typed 3 words and hit send, come at 7. And for the first time since Isabel's funeral, he turned off the office light before 2 in the morning. Ethan Montgomery wasn't sure what he expected at 7 a.m. Maybe a woman trying too hard designer blazer, a smile stretched to breaking, talking over him before she even sat down. That's how most candidates arrived, armored in self-assurance that lasted exactly 1 morning in this house. But when the doorbell chimed, the woman on the other side didn't fit the pattern. She was in a simple navy dress, hair pulled into a low twist, no perfume he could smell from the threshold. Her brown eyes were steady without being confrontational, and she held a travel mug in one hand, a paper bag in the other. Mr. Montgomery, she said, I'm Amara Hayes. I brought coffee and scones. He raised a brow. Scones. First rule of working with children, feed the adults before they get cranky, she said, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. He stepped back to let her in. "Let's talk in my office before the boys get up. If you last past breakfast, it'll be a record." Amara followed him through the house without craning her neck at the artwork or the view. Instead, she glanced at the photographs on the wall snapshots of Isabel with the boys frozen in summers and holidays. Her expression didn't change, but her pace slowed for half a step, as if noting the absence of more recent ones. In his office, Ethan gestured toward the leather chair opposite his desk. "Most people try to impress me with credentials," he said. "You didn't list any degrees or certifications." "Why? Because they're not what makes me good at my job," she replied. "Paperwork doesn't calm a child who thinks love is a disappearing trick." He leaned back, folding his arms. "You think that's what my sons believe? I think they've lost someone irreplaceable," she said. "And I think people who've never been through that try to fix what isn't broken by controlling it or distracting from it. I don't do either." He studied her, weighing the certainty in her tone against the desperation that had driven him to even consider this meeting. "What do you do then I stay?" she said simply. "When it gets loud, when it gets ugly, when they throw words meant to hurt, I stay. Not because I'm unshakable, but because kids need proof that you can be shaken and still stay." Her words landed harder than he'd expected. For 6 months, every adult who'd crossed this threshold had been looking for an exit. He wasn't sure he could believe she'd be different, but he wanted to. "My sons have driven away 13 nannies in half a year," he said. "They can be destructive. Cruel, even." Amara's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. "I've worked with kids who set fire to their own beds to see if anyone cared enough to stop them. Destruction is just pain that hasn't found a safe place to go." Ethan stared at her for a long moment, then exhaled. "When can you start now?" she said. A thud echoed from upstairs, followed by the rapid-fire stomp of 3 pairs of feet. Ethan winced. "They're up," good Amara said, standing. "Let's see what the morning brings." She followed the sound into the kitchen. The scene was a study in chaos. Lucas perched on the counter, pouring cereal directly into his mouth. Caleb stirring an alarming amount of syrup into a glass of milk. Eli chasing the family's golden retriever with a slice of toast. "Morning," Amara said, like she'd just walked into a cafe. "I'm Amara. I brought scones." 3 heads swiveled toward her. Lucas narrowed his eyes. "We don't like nannies." "That's fine," she said, placing the paper bag on the table. "I'm not here to be a nanny. I'm here to see if you're any good at helping me eat all these before your dad steals them." That threw them off just long enough for Eli to sidle closer to the bag. "What kind, Blueberry? Still warm?" Lucas crossed his arms. "We don't trust you." She nodded. "Makes sense. Trust takes time. Lucky for you, I've got plenty." Ethan watched from the doorway as she broke a scone in half and slid it toward the edge of the bag, not pushing, not coaxing, just leaving it there. Within minutes, all 3 boys were sitting at the table, crumbs dotting their t-shirts, the air in the kitchen subtly different. It wasn't peace yet, but it wasn't war either. From somewhere outside, faint but distinct, came the click of a camera shutter. And though none of them saw it, a headline was already on its way to being written, one that would test exactly how much staying power Amara Hayes really had. The first hint came not from the boys, but from Ethan's phone. It buzzed twice in his pocket, hard enough to pull his attention from the unlikely scene unfolding at the kitchen table. He glanced at the screen. Mark Reynolds. "Give me a second," Ethan murmured to Amara, stepping into the hallway before answering. "This better be important, Mark." "It is, Mark," said voice clipped. "The Tribune's running a feature in tomorrow's lifestyle section. Headline, Montgomery Triplets, the Billionaire's Wild Bunch." Ethan stopped mid-stride. What they've got quotes from 3 former nannies, none of them flattering. Words like unmanageable, dangerous, emotionally disturbed. Ethan swore under his breath. "And that's not the worst of it," Mark continued. "A freelance photographer's been hanging around the lake. They've got fresh shots of the boys. I think they caught this morning's. Whatever was happening before I called." Ethan rubbed his temple. "Before you called, one of them was pouring cereal into his mouth like a keg stand, another was making a syrup milkshake, and the third was terrorizing the dog." "Is that what we're talking about, more or less?" Mark said. "With the right angle, it'll look like a frat party for 6-year-olds. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Thanks for the heads up." Call legal, see if there's anything we can do. Already on it, Mark replied. But Ethan, brace yourself. Once it's out, you won't be able to control the narrative. Ethan ended the call and stood still for a beat, his reflection in the hallway mirror looking older than he remembered. When he returned to the kitchen, the mood had shifted slightly. Lucas was still guarding his piece of scone like it was gold bullion, but Caleb was actually listening, as Amara told them a story about a boy who learned to build forts instead of throwing rocks. Ethan hated what he had to do next. "Amara, can I talk to you a minute?" She glanced up, reading something in his tone, and nodded. "Boys, keep an eye on the scones for me. Make sure the dog doesn't get any." In the hallway, Ethan explained the situation. The article, the quotes, the photos. "I'm telling you now, because once this runs, you're going to be part of the story. They'll paint you as either the savior or the latest casualty. Either way, it's going to be loud." Amara didn't flinch. "I've been called worse by people who didn't know what they were talking about," she said. "And by kids who did. I'm giving you an out," Ethan said quietly. "If you want to walk away before the circus hits, I won't blame you." She shook her head. "If I walk now, what did the boys learn? That they were right not to trust me. That everyone leaves eventually. I'm not teaching them that." For a moment, Ethan just looked at her, wondering how someone could walk into the mess of his life with so little hesitation. From the kitchen, Eli's giggle rose like a bell, followed by Caleb's quiet laugh, and miraculously, Lucas's voice joining in. "That," Amara said, tilting her head toward the sound, "is why I'm staying." Ethan's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Mark with a single photo attached. It was from that morning, Lucas on the balcony bronze sculpture in hand, Amara in the frame, holding it steady. From the wrong angle, it looked like she was helping him lift it over the rail. A slow, cold dread curled in his stomach. If this was what the press ran with the story, wasn't just going to sting, it was going to draw blood. The article went live at 6:00 a.m. the next morning. By 6:03, Ethan's phone was buzzing like a hornet trapped in his pocket. He ignored the first few calls, hoping they'd die off. They didn't. By the time he reached for the device, there were 20 unread messages, 3 missed calls from board members, and 1 from the boys' school principal. And at the top of it all, Mark's text. "You're going to want to see this before the boys do." Ethan opened the link. The headline sprawled across the Tribune's lifestyle section in a font that felt designed to wound Montgomery Triplets, Billionaire's wild bunch, or children in crisis. Beneath it, the lead photo, Lucas on the balcony, clutching the bronze sculpture, Amara beside him. The angle made it look as though she were lifting it over the railing, not steadying it. The caption read, "New nanny Amara Hayes, seen here assisting Lucas Montgomery during a morning incident, joins a long list of caretakers facing the triplets' notorious behavior." They'd paired it with pull quotes from past nannies. "They're unmanageable. I feared for my safety. No discipline, no respect, no hope." And then, worst of all, a sentence about Isabel. "Since the loss of their mother, sources say the boys have spiraled beyond their father's control." Ethan's grip tightened around the phone until his knuckles whitened. The boys hadn't seen it yet, but they would. He found them in the breakfast nook, still in pajamas, hunched over cereal bowls. Amara sat with them, sipping coffee, listening to Caleb describe a dream he'd had about building a treehouse. "We need to talk," Ethan said. His tone made Amara look up immediately. "Now?" she asked, scanning his face. He nodded once. Amara turned to the boys. "We're going to watch something together. But before we do, I want you to remember words in a newspaper aren't the same as truth. Deal?" They shrugged, uncertain. In the living room, Ethan pulled up the article on the TV screen. The boys stared as their own faces appeared frozen in unflattering moments, framed by ugly words. Lucas's brows knit. "Why are they saying you were helping me throw it?" he asked Amara. "Because someone took a picture without knowing the whole story," she said evenly. "Pictures can lie just as easily as people." Eli pointed at a quote about dangerous behavior. His voice was small. "Are we dangerous?" "No," Amara said before Ethan could. "You're hurting. And sometimes hurting looks messy." Caleb read another line aloud, his voice catching no hope. He didn't look at anyone, just stared at the floor. That's a lie, Amara said softly. Hope is right here, in this room, in the fact that you three got up and sat at the table together this morning, in the fact that you've already lasted longer with me than anyone said you would. Lucas's eyes were sharp. They think we're bad kids. They don't know you, Amara replied. They only know a story someone else told. The question is, what story are you going to tell about yourselves? The boys didn't answer, but the air shifted. Something in their posture eased just a fraction. From the corner of his eye, Ethan caught Amara's glance, steady, unshaken, like she'd planted herself in the middle of a storm and wasn't planning to move. The phone on the coffee table buzzed again. This time, it was an unfamiliar number with a voicemail notification. He played it on speaker. Mr. Montgomery, this is Denise Carter from Child Protective Services. We've received several calls regarding your children after this morning's Tribune article. We'll need to schedule a home visit as soon as possible. The message ended. The room went very still. Eli's voice broke the silence. Are they going to take us away? Ethan crouched in front of him. Not a chance, he said. But even as the words left his mouth, a knot tightened in his stomach. Amara leaned forward. Then we show them, all day, everything that's real in this house. No staged perfection, no hiding the noise. Just the truth. Lucas studied her, and if they don't believe it, then we make sure we believe it, she said. Because that's the thing no one can take away. The black sedan pulled up at precisely 9 a.m. Even before the engine cut, Ethan recognized the deliberate efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. A tall woman stepped out, late 50s steel-gray hair, pinned in a bun so tight it might have been welded there. She wore a charcoal suit and carried a leather portfolio. Her eyes swept the property in a slow, practiced arc, noting details: the manicured lawn, the lake beyond, the faint scuff mark on the front step. Mr. Montgomery, she said, extending a firm hand. Denise Carter, Child Protective Services. Miss Carter, Ethan replied. This is Amara Hayes. I know who she is, Carter said, offering Amara a brief, unreadable nod. Let's begin. Inside, the boys were already in the kitchen, wearing aprons 2 sizes too big. Lucas was measuring flour. Caleb was cracking eggs with quiet concentration, and Eli was humming under his breath as he stirred. Amara stood between them, guiding without hovering. Gentle with the whisk, Eli. Let the batter breathe. Carter's brows lifted a fraction. This is your morning routine. On days we want pancakes, Amara said. It helps them start with a win. Lucas glanced up at the social worker. We're making enough for you too. Carter blinked, clearly unused to being addressed so directly by a child in a case file. That's thoughtful. The next 2 hours unfolded without the artificial polish Ethan had dreaded. Amara didn't try to hide the noise when the boys argued about whose turn it was to stir. She didn't step in when Lucas sulked over losing a board game to Caleb. She let him stew until he decided to rejoin on his own. At one point, a loud truck passed outside. Eli froze spoon midair, his eyes going wide the way they did when something pulled him back to the accident he could barely remember, but never forgot. Amara crouched beside him, murmuring something too soft for Ethan to hear. After a moment, Eli nodded, set the spoon down, and climbed into her lap, resting his head against her chest. She didn't rush him, didn't tell him to be brave. She just held him until the tremor in his shoulders faded. From the corner of the room, Carter watched, expression unreadable, but gaze fixed. By afternoon, the boys had moved to the living room, sprawled on the rug, with blocks building what they said was a castle for Mom in heaven. Lucas explained each tower with military precision. Caleb added hidden rooms for treasure and secrets. Eli made sure there was a garden, so she has flowers. Ethan stood back, something tightening in his throat. They hadn't spoken of Isabel like this, not without anger, in months. When Carter finally closed her portfolio, it was past 5. She asked Ethan and Amara to step outside while the boys cleaned up. I've been doing this job a long time, she said. I've walked into houses where children were truly unsafe. This isn't one of them. Relief loosened Ethan's spine for the first time all day. They're not perfect, Carter continued. But they're not the monsters your press seems to think they are. They're grieving, and they're trying. Her gaze shifted to Amara. Whatever you're doing, Miss Hayes, keep doing it. These boys need someone who doesn't flinch. When the sedan finally rolled away, Ethan turned to Amara. "I don't think you realize what you just pulled off," he said. She shook her head. "It wasn't a performance. That's the point. If we're going to keep them safe, they have to learn. They don't have to fake it for anyone, not even CPS." From the doorway, Lucas's voice called out, "Dad, Amara, come see the castle before we knock it down." Ethan glanced at her, a reluctant smile tugging at his mouth. "You heard the boss." As they stepped inside, Amara caught sight of the boys kneeling in a tight circle around their creation heads bent together. The castle was crooked, a little messy, but strong in its own way. And maybe she thought so were they. The knock came on a Sunday afternoon, just as the boys were halfway through a backyard soccer match with Amara acting as referee. Ethan opened the door to find Margaret Bennett, Isabel's mother, standing stiffly on the porch in a pale wool coat. She had the same high cheekbones as Isabel, but none of her warmth. Behind her stood Isabel's younger brother Richard, his expression somewhere between pity and judgment. "Ethan," Margaret said, her voice formal. "We need to talk." It wasn't really a request. He led them to the sitting room, trying to ignore the way Richard's eyes flicked over every detail, like he was appraising a house for sale. Amara stayed outside with the boys, sensing the temperature shift even from the yard. Margaret didn't waste time. "We're concerned," she began. "About the children, about the environment they're being raised in." Ethan's jaw tightened. "They're fine, are they?" she asked, arching a brow. "Because I've read the papers. I've seen the photographs. And now I hear you've hired someone with no formal qualifications to care for them." Her tone made the word "someone" sound like stray. "Amara Hayes has been here less than 2 weeks," Ethan said evenly. "And in that time, I've seen more progress than in the 6 months before." Richard leaned forward. "Or maybe she's just good at putting on a show. You know, CPS doesn't always see the whole truth." Ethan's patience thinned. "What exactly are you suggesting that the boys might be better off with us?" Margaret said bluntly. "We could provide stability structure. They're my sons." Ethan cut in sharper than he intended. Margaret didn't flinch. "They're Isabel's sons, too. And I won't stand by if I believe they're being damaged." Before he could answer, the glass doors to the backyard slid open, and Lucas stepped inside, breathing hard from the game. He froze at the sight of his grandmother and uncle. "What are you doing here?" he asked, suspicion already rising in his voice. Margaret's face softened into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Lucas, darling, we were just talking to your father about what's best for you." "What's best for us is not talking about us like we're not here," Lucas shot back. Ethan stood quickly. "Lucas," but before he could redirect, Amara appeared in the doorway, Eli on her hip and Caleb trailing close behind. She took in the scene in a glance, then set Eli down gently. "Boys," she said, "how about you grab some lemonade from the kitchen? Give us a few minutes." Lucas didn't move. "If this is about taking us away, I'm staying." Margaret blinked. "Taking you away?" "No one said yes, you did," Lucas said flatly. "That's what better off with us means. I'm not dumb." Caleb stepped up beside him. "We're fine here." "And we like Amara," Eli added, crossing his small arms. The three of them stood together, a miniature phalanx. Amara didn't say a word she didn't need to. Margaret's mouth tightened. "This isn't over, Ethan." She swept out, Richard trailing after her with a last lingering glance at Amara. When the door closed, Ethan turned to the boys. "You three okay?" Lucas nodded. "We just didn't want them to think we'd go without a fight." Amara looked at him for a long moment, then smiled, slow, genuine, proud. "Good," she said. "Because I'm not going without one either." 6 months later, the Montgomery estate didn't sound like the same house. The shouting that once echoed through its halls had been replaced by the thud of soccer balls, the shuffle of Lego pieces, and the occasional peal of laughter. Lucas had traded his balcony stunts for organizing backyard games. Caleb, once silent, had taken to telling long, winding stories at the dinner table, complete with hand gestures and sound effects. And Eli, sweet, stubborn Eli, no longer cried himself to sleep. He'd curl up with the family's golden retriever and drift off before Amara had even finished the first chapter of a bedtime story. Ethan had changed too. He worked fewer late nights, learned the exact way each of his sons liked their sandwiches cut, and discovered that no business deal could match the satisfaction of seeing all three boys race toward him when he walked through the door. And through it all, Amara had been the constant, steady patient, unshakable. She'd woven herself into the fabric of their lives without fanfare, in the way she remembered each boy's unspoken signals, in the way she sat beside Ethan on the porch after the boys were asleep talking about nothing and everything. On an evening in early spring, the lake outside was still edged with ice, but the garden was just beginning to stir tiny shoots, pushing through cold soil. Ethan found Amara there, kneeling beside a bed of early tulips. "Planting?" he asked. She glanced up, brushing dirt from her hands. "Checking what made it through the winter." He stepped closer, heart beating harder than it should. "I've been doing some checking of my own." She smiled faintly. "Oh, I've been thinking about that night you walked into my house," he said. "I didn't know it then, but you weren't just here for the boys. You were here for me too. You reminded me how to be a father, how to be more than what was left after Isabel." Her expression softened, but she stayed quiet. He took a breath, reached into his jacket, and pulled out a small velvet box. "Amara Hayes, you've done something no one else could. You gave my sons back their childhood. You gave me back my life. And now I can't imagine either without you." He opened the box. Inside, a simple diamond caught the fading light. "Will you marry me? Will you be part of our family, not just in the ways you already are, but in every way?" For a long second, the garden was quiet, except for the sound of lake water shifting against the shore. Then Amara's eyes shimmered and she nodded. "Yes, yes, I will." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger just as a chorus of gasps erupted behind them. The boys were standing at the edge of the porch, grinning so wide, their faces barely fit the expressions. "You're going to be our mom?" Eli asked, bouncing on his toes. Amara laughed through her tears. "Looks like it." Lucas crossed his arms, but his smile betrayed him. "Good. We were starting to think Dad would never figure it out." The wedding was held in the garden where Ethan had proposed, the early summer air, thick with the scent of blooming lilies. White chairs lined the lawn. A small arch, draped in soft fabric, stood at the center, and the lake beyond shimmered in the sunlight. Lucas, Caleb, and Eli wore matching navy suits, each with a small white rose pinned to the lapel. They'd insisted on carrying the rings themselves, practicing their walk for weeks until they could do it without racing each other down the aisle. When the music began, all three marched forward with solemn pride, heads high, until Eli spotted Amara waiting at the end of the path. Then his steps sped up, his grin breaking the formality. Ethan stood at the arch, hands clasped, his eyes fixed on her. Amara walked slowly toward him, her dress simple but luminous, the boys circling her like satellites. The vows weren't traditional. Ethan spoke first. "You didn't just agree to marry me. You agreed to love three boys who weren't ready to trust anyone. You gave them and me a reason to believe again. You are the answer to prayers I didn't even know I had." Amara's voice trembled, but didn't break. "You taught me that family isn't only about blood, it's about choosing each other every day. You trusted me with the most precious parts of your life. And I promised to protect love and fight for all of you for the rest of mine." Then came the surprise. Lucas, Caleb, and Eli stepping forward with folded slips of paper. Lucas read for all of them. "We promise to be good, not perfect, but trying. We promise to remember that Mom loved us, and you do too. And we promise to make sure Dad doesn't skip lunch because he forgets sometimes." The guests laughed through their tears. When Ethan and Amara kissed the boys, wrapped their arms around both of them, the five of them, a knot no storm could untie. 5 years later, the Montgomerys had grown by one, a little girl named Lily, with her father's eyes and Amara's quiet strength. Lucas, Caleb, and Eli, now 11, were honor students known in school for helping younger kids and standing up to bullies. The house was still loud, still full of energy, but it was a different kind of noise, the kind that comes from safety. Ethan had expanded his business to include a foundation supporting single parents and grieving families. Amara had written a book on helping children through loss, speaking at conferences around the country, but she was always home for dinner. On the anniversary of Isabel's passing, the family gathered at her grave with flowers Lily had picked herself. The boys knelt together. Lucas speaking quietly. "Mom, this is Amara and Lily. You'd like them?" Dad smiles again now, so you don't have to worry. Ethan stood behind them, his hand in Amara's, and for the first time in years, there was no ache in the silence, only peace.